the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Big Ten, your daily podcast on the Big Ten Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
From Madison to Minneapolis, today's stop on the spring football tour, a part of the Locked On Big Ten podcast, is all about the Twin Cities and all about the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Big Ten podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ben Stevens. It is Tuesday, April 20th, and on this stop in the Twin Cities, there's only one man that I picked up on the virtual bus because we need his expertise. We need the smartest mind in all of the Big Ten Conference. Of course, I'm referring to Daniel House, back on the podcast, the founder of GophersGuru.com, to enlighten us on everything that has been happening for spring practice for PJ Fleck in the Row the Boaters up there in the Twin Cities. Glad to be with you in Minnesota right now, Daniel House. Glad to be talking some Gophers spring football.
Happy to be here. Spring football's back. It was exciting. First practice I've been to in 407 days at any level, watching it live. I was like a kid in a candy shop, ready to go. Everyone could sense it. I was laughing because another guy was like to me, "You look so ready for this." And I'm like, I've been waiting for days, years, months to do this. So it's nice to be back.
There are not many better football minds that I have interacted with, really across the spectrum, whether it be college football, Big Ten football, or the NFL, than Daniel House. So we go into his insight today. And you mentioned you were at practice over the weekend, looking at what Minnesota was doing this spring. You were one of 4 people in attendance to watch that practice. So Daniel House, I ask you, what did you see from the Gophers this weekend?
I saw the defensive line's taking a big step forward, and that's good news for Minnesota fans because last year I talked so much about controlling gaps, getting gap penetration. It's the key to success with Joe Rossi's scheme, and last year they didn't do it enough. You saw as the year progressed, they got better in that category, but the inexperience they had at the defensive tackle position, they were way down the barrel on the in the defensive tackle room. Inexperienced guys just trying to get some snaps. So this year, going into the transfer portal, getting Niles Pinckney from Clemson, who's played over 1,100 snaps on a national championship team. Val Martin from NC State, another guy who probably will play mostly 3-tech, 1-gap penetrator type of player. Niles Pinckney can go between different shades, probably 3-tech, and he'll even kick inside and nose even on pass rushing downs. With Clemson, he played more on early downs and was really good against the run. I like his hand technique particularly, but watching the practices, you see that experience because not only do you get those guys, but Micah Treadway, former transfer from Notre Dame's back, Keontae Shad's back. They've done some really good things as well with the development of D'Angelo Carter, player that I really liked coming out. He got experience last year, and Rashad Cheney Jr. as well. So they'll be 6 deep at the defensive tackle position. And then they also have quite a bit of versatility at the defensive end position, guys who can play 5-technique defensive end, kick in on pass rushing downs. I like what they did with the defensive line because there are question marks in the secondary for sure.
You can already hear it in his voice, the enthusiasm, the excitement, breaking down Minnesota's D-line. So before we dive even deeper into spring practice here in 2021, let's take a quick look back at the 2020 Big Ten football season. Obviously a disappointment for PJ Fleck and company after the high expectations following the very successful 2019 season. But what do you think the Gophers can learn from 2020 as they approach this spring and the rest of the offseason?
Weird year, Ben, last season. I mean, the Gophers had a lot of inexperience at defense, and that was the year they really could have used spring ball to get better defensively, get some reps. Instead, you're throwing guys into the fire. They were doing virtual learning the whole spring. And we talked with Mariano Sori-Marin after practice, a linebacker for the Gophers, and he said Joe Rossi really wasn't able to do a lot of the things he wanted schematically because they were spending so much time on player development, trying to get guys ready to play. So now this year, the benefit that they had was you threw those guys into the fire last year. They got experience that they needed, and that will benefit future seasons. And PJ Fleck said that. I'm not going to, shelter these guys away from playing time. I want them to play this year so it benefits the program into the future. And now you're starting to see that because we got to see just about an hour and 15 minutes or so of practice on Saturday. Not a lot of passing in that setting, but we got to see some heavy running periods, and they mixed it up a little bit, some 7-on-7, some team periods, a 1-on-1 session. And what really stood out was the defensive line. Like I said, the front seven looks much improved, and that's the area that the Gophers struggled with the most last season. If you watched any of the games, I mean, they were getting run all over at points. I honestly think one of the bigger question marks is the offense. I mean, what do you get out of some of those receivers? Rashad Bateman departing. He opted out late last year after coming back and deciding to get his eligibility restored. But Chris Bell's leading the way. Then after that, you got a ton of question marks. I mean, Daniel Jackson got a little experience last year, but then you're looking at guys like Doug Emillion, Mike Brown-Stevens. They went and got Dalen Wright, a receiver from Texas A&M, big target. Wasn't quite as bulky as I thought he'd be. I thought he was a bigger target, but really moves well in and out of breaks. I thought, he's the type of guy that needs to adjust and learn the system, but could make an impact. Brady Boyd is a name I'm keeping an eye on from Texas, South Lake Carroll High School down in Texas. A big get for the Gophers. He's worked with David Robinson, a guy who developed Des Bryant, Emmanuel Sanders, Antonio Brown, a few other receivers on the NFL circuit. Really good route runner, great body control, nice catch radius. Dominated some state championship games, got his team deep into the playoffs last year. One of those guys that could emerge. That's the biggest question I have. Do they have enough firepower from the wide receivers to have a balanced offense? Because they have a lot of experience returning up front. Mo Ibrahim coming back, Tanner Morgan coming back. It comes down to those receivers for me.
You seamlessly transitioned me into my next question because you mentioned the quarterback position. Tanner Morgan back at the helm of that Minnesota offense. A slight decline in production in 2020. Where do you think Tanner Morgan can improve the most this offseason?
I think it starts with pocket movement, pocket feel, being able to move around, extend plays, and get familiarity with the system. That was the biggest thing last year. I don't think people put enough stock into not having the player development time to get timing with your receivers. I asked Tanner about that after practice on Saturday. I mean, what does it feel like now having the ability to get timing with the receivers this spring? And you didn't have that last year. And he was talking about how much of a difference that made. And last year, having new offensive coordinator Mike Sanford coming in the mix in the middle of a pandemic, you got no time really to work with him in person. So the offense had a lot of moving pieces. Rashad Bateman was out, Rashad Bateman was in, then he was out again. They ran the ball well, and I talked to a lot of coaches across the country, and they said you couldn't really invest your time completely into all the rushing and the passing concepts. You kind of had to pick which one you wanted to spend the most time diving into the details of. So I think Minnesota heavily invested in, resources into teaching those running concepts, and now they need to find some balance. I know tendency-wise they need to pass the ball more on first and second down. They were one of the better teams passing the ball on second down. Tanner Morgan, that is one of the most underrated aspects of his game, completing a high percentage of passes. I wrote about that on Gophers Guru. Just early down, second down, particular success for Tanner Morgan, and what the offense can do if they tweak their tendencies on first down. So I'd keep an eye on that this season.
I'm having so much fun. It is the later part of April already, and we're diving into second down passing success rate for Minnesota in 2021. This is the brilliance you get from Daniel House, folks. This is why I call him the smartest mind in all of the Big Ten Conference, especially when it comes to football. For Tanner Morgan in the Gophers next year, having Mohamed Ibrahim back, the reigning Big Ten running back of the year, will be an added benefit, and a lot of returning production along that offensive line. Maybe too much, because you had a couple guys like Daniel Falele that opted out last year, now back a part of that mix. So we'll see exactly what shakes out along that offense for the Gophers. As we flip back to the other side of the ball, you talked about the defensive front and the defensive line this upcoming season for Joe Rossi and the Gophers. Where do you think the biggest question mark is in that defense for Minnesota this upcoming year?
It's cornerback, Ben. That's the biggest question. Coney Durr comes back, and that was huge because I didn't anticipate Coney Durr would return. So getting him in there to lead the group, he'll be one of the more underrated players entering the draft next season. I mean, look at what Benjamin St. Juste is doing right now, probably a day 2 pick. So you have to replace that production on defense. And I don't know really who it's going to be at this point. Terrell T-Time Smith, is he possibly the second cornerback?
Hold on a second. Terrell T-Time Smith. What is the T-Time part of that name there?
T-Time's the nickname. Everybody just calls him T-Time up here because I don't know if it's because his first name's spelled weird. It's not 2 R's. I think it's 1 R. I remember Notre Dame sent him like an offer once, and they spelled his name wrong, and he's like, "Oh, I'm taking you out of consideration because you spelled my name wrong," or something like that.
Fair enough.
Terrell T-Time, Phil Howard, maybe converted wide receiver who played cornerback and has got some experience there. The sleeper is Bishop McDonald, the guy who transferred from the University of Minnesota Duluth, been working developing the past couple of seasons. I'm keeping my eye on him. But Justin Wally, a cornerback, true freshman, Mr. Mississippi, Minnesota managed to land him, played running back and defensive back in high school. I watched his film and I thought he was super impressive, but then I went to practice on Saturday and I left and went, okay, this guy should be getting serious attention because he has a chance to make a huge impact. I remember when I went to the first couple of practices with Rashad Bateman, and after watching as much football as I have in practices, you can just tell when this guy has an uncanny, natural feel for the game, just all this talent. And Justin Wally just made a beautiful play on a fade route intended for Chris Ottman-Bell. Then he just makes this great play over the middle, managed to stay tight out of the receiver, out of the break, and flip his hips, get into the passing lane, just perfect position, great transition, quickness, and agility. All those things that you saw on film show up. So I'm saying that there's serious upside with Justin Wally. He is a guy who could possibly emerge as an impact player right away as a freshman alongside Coney Durr. Then you're probably looking at Justice Harris playing nickel cornerback, or keep an eye on Steven Ortiz Jr., 4-star commit from Arizona coming up here. He wasn't an early enrollee, but he'll be up here for the season. Electric player with a lot of versatility, very physical, can play coverage, play in the box. I love watching his tape. So does he get some time? I don't know, but Minnesota has question marks in the secondary room, and you don't have a lot of time to get ready because week one you have Ohio State's receivers coming in. So we'll find out right away if Minnesota's cornerbacks have it or not.
Ohio State's receivers are going to put the fear of God into a lot of secondaries across all of college football this year. That is for sure, with how deep and how talented they are. But not a surprise to me, Daniel House, the guy you mentioned out of Arizona, the early enrollee who did not come in the winter. That doesn't surprise me. A guy from Arizona waiting on his first winter in the Twin Cities, trying to get there for fall camp and summer workouts as well. So we've talked about some of the question marks on both sides of the ball. What do you think is the best overall returning position group? Is it part of those fronts, either the offensive line or the D-line as well?
Yeah, it's probably the offensive line, and it will be very interesting to see how that position group plays out over the next few months because, like you mentioned, Daniel Falele, Curtis Dunlap coming back, but are they physically ready? Is it going to take some time for them to shake off some of the rust? I like the group that they had going last year. I think John Michael Schmidt's center is one of the more underrated players in the country. He's graded high with PFF. I think a lot of NFL teams are going to like him as a zone scheme center because he can reach block really well. He gets to the second level, fits the outside zone scheme really well. Connor Olson coming back again, guy with so much experience and versatility to all the interior positions. Blaze Andries, a guy that's played guard and tackle. Sam Schluter's returning as well. So how do they shake all that out at the guard and tackle positions? There's like 6 offensive linemen that are really solid up there that can move around. But I want to see first, how did Dunlap and Falele adjust after being gone for a while? Because I think that is going to take some time, and they're going to have to get back into football mode. You can be in practice, you can work out, you can get back, but it's never like being in a game against these really good pass rushers. And week one, like I said, there is no lead into the season at all. It's not like you're playing some low-level FCS squad or some small school. You're playing Ohio State week one on a Thursday night in Minneapolis. I'm excited for the game, but we're going to learn a lot about Minnesota right away week one.
Week one on a Thursday night against the Ohio State Buckeyes, probably in prime time in the Twin Cities under the lights. I already got chills thinking about that game, Daniel House. And we have a long way to go, and you've provided us a very thorough roster breakdown, the most knowledge we could ever hope for about Minnesota Golden Gopher football in the spring. That's what we have you here. So I finish asking you this. We talked about 2019, the 11 wins, the most since the early 1900s for the Minnesota football program, then followed up by a disappointing 2020. In your expectation level for 2021, what do you think this season looks like more, 2019 or 2020?
It should be back to 2019. There's so much depth and competition on this roster. That's what I noticed when I left practice on Saturday was this team is definitely not as young as it was the year before. Even in 2019, I mean, they were able to fill in some gaps with some transfers to get things going in 2019. But, PJ Fleck and the staff did a nice job of hitting that transfer portal, bringing in some veteran leaders on the defensive side. Like I mentioned, Pinckney and Martin, and then Jack Gibbons at the linebacker position as well. Those leaders that they have there, and then some of the younger guys that gained experience last year, they have more depth and competition at all the spots, especially, up front on both sides of the ball. And that's where I think you win in the Big Ten Conference. Minnesota just hasn't been able to establish a solid pass rush since PJ Fleck's been here. Now they have a versatile defensive line with a lot of upside. They're starting to get the type of player that they want that can play multiple positions and shades up front. So with that in mind, I think Minnesota will be much improved up front, and that's what they need to take the next step against these teams like Iowa and Wisconsin. Beating them, you got to win up front. But like I said, got to be able to get some development out of those secondary wide receivers on the depth chart, and then looking at the cornerback position and even safety, because safety was kind of a liability last year at times. Jordan Howden has a lot of experience, but how does Tyler Newman develop? There are question marks specifically in the secondary and then a wide receiver on offense. But if you have it up front, that's a good start, because especially on defense, if you can get after the quarterback, it helps your cornerbacks out. They don't have to cover as long down the field and things like that. I would always build my teams around the pass rush, and I think Minnesota's starting to get to that point.
Always a battle up front in the trenches in the Big Ten Conference. That is a necessity. Minnesota should be much improved in that area for 2021. We learned so much today. Everybody here on the Locked On Big Ten podcast has become a smarter Big Ten football fan because of the knowledge that was dropped by Daniel House, the founder of GophersGuru.com, the smartest mind in all of the Big Ten Conference, on display on a Tuesday in late April. Daniel House, as always, I thank you for your information, your expertise. There are none better out there in my mind in the entire conference than you, my friend. Great stuff as always.
Big Ten Ben, it's always fun. I love coming on with you, and I'm ready for football season, even though Illinois is playing a spring game tonight on a Monday night.
Monday night.
Spring game? Are you serious? This is exciting news for me.
Bert, that's what we got. Bert's back, baby. He's trying to bring bully ball back. That starts on a Monday night, right in your face to open up the week. I appreciate it in a way.
I'm ready, man. I'm ready to come back on and talk football. Let's do it again soon.
Final bonus question for you. Is Rashad Bateman a first-round pick next Thursday in the first round of the NFL draft?
Rashad Bateman's a first-round pick next week. And I think it's after the pro day. The pro day took it over the top, being able to show that speed. That's what the scouts wanted to see that I was talking with. They wanted to really verify some of the things that they were hearing. He ran that 4.39 at that combine, but they wanted to get it with their own hand times, and I think that's been the biggest question mark. I know one scout told me during the season, can he run a sub 4.5, coming in at 4.39 to 4.44 range? That's right where he needs to be to get picked in the first round. So I don't know. Minnesota Vikings might be a team to watch with a trade back. That could possibly happen. I could see Minnesota making an aggressive move for Orlando Brown Jr. From Baltimore. If they pull that trade off or able to move back, maybe take Bateman at 27. That's something that I'm keeping an eye on. A little scenario for people to think about, NFL fans.
The storylines, the narrative, the cohesion of the Minnesota teams. I would absolutely love that, as I absolutely loved this conversation today on the spring football tour, all about the Minnesota Golden Gophers with the smartest mind in the Big Ten Conference, the founder of GophersGuru.com, Daniel House. Once again, thank you very much for your time.
We'll see you soon.